Join us for part 2 with Mr. Perrin Beatty, former Cabinet Minister for multiple portfolios, CBC Chief Executive Officer, and currently the Chief Executive Officer for the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. We talk about leading people in very public roles, the personal toll it can take, and decisions that every leader needs to make.
I love this. I'm trying to figure out what question do I ask, because could we pivot to a bit to the business world? You know, you've also had 25 years plus working directly with businesses, whether it be in the manufacturing sector or more broadly with businesses across Canada, and representing their concerns, their needs, the consolidation and creating communities of business leaders, and encouraging those who are at local levels to build their communities. In your view, and you know, you've met all sorts of folks, I imagine. What demands, what skills, what things does a leader need today, in your view, to build successful businesses, whether it be a 2-person shop or a 2,000-person organization? Or what are the things that somebody needs today, in your view, based upon your years of experience and being able to make all these observations that you've obviously spent a lot of time thinking about?
I guess the starting point is vision. You have to have a clear sense of what it is. Where does you want to go? And that certainly applies for anybody in politics, but it applies for business as well. You need not necessarily be an expert coming in. You need to know what you know and what you don't know, and where to go to get the advice that you need. It's often, if you're an entrepreneur, it's often a very lonely experience that you have, and you may have had a brilliant idea to develop a new product or a new service, but that doesn't mean you're skilled in all of the aspects of management and how to grow your business and what's taking place in the marketplace and so on, and what the second product is going to be. So you need to look at how you build teams and how you draw the best out of people. In my career, when I first went into cabinet, I was 29. I was the youngest cabinet minister in Canadian history at that time. 9 months later, it was Joe Clark's government. We were defeated. I was the youngest former cabinet minister in Canadian history.
We had some nice bookends, anyways.
Exactly. My brother-in-law had been working in Mr. Trudeau's office. One of his jobs was to win my constituency. It was the Ontario Deaf Person
So family dinners must have been interesting for you.
I do remember one Thanksgiving dinner that got a bit heated. And I'll tell you about that off air. But I went to him because he'd had experience working with cabinet ministers, working in Mr. Trudeau's office. And what he said to me was, as you're choosing your staff, as you're choosing the people to work around you, your starting point should be that everybody choose people who are smarter than you are. Put it that directly. He said, if you can do the job of any of the people that you have there in your staff working with you better than they can, you have the wrong person. So very often, leaders are afraid of being seen not to have all of the answers and of not being the smartest person in the room. What has served me well was that advice that I got very early, and I've watched it with other leaders as well. They don't feel that being surrounded by people who are more knowledgeable than they are, or who are quicker than they are, who have skills that they don't have, they don't see that as a liability. They see that as a strength. And secure leaders, confident leaders, reach out to bring those people in. People who are insecure want to make sure that there's nobody who can show them up, or who can say, you're just dead wrong on this. It's the same way, and it's interesting. When I left CBC, I was just about to turn 50, and it was when I was moving then to the private sector. And I was very fortunate to work with a company that provided executive advice. One of the pieces of advice they gave was to create your own cabinet, your own board of directors of people who are very good friends, who are such good friends that you know that they have your interests entirely at heart, and that you're so confident they're good friends that they're going to be comfortable saying to you when you're wrong, when you're doing your career planning. So the first thing I'd been in public life all my life. I've been in Parliament, cabinet minister, president of CBC, and so on. Turning 50, it was the first time ever that I had to ask myself, well, what do you want to do? You start counting down at that age about how much time do I have, how do I want to use it? And up until that time, from the time that I made the first decision to run for Parliament through the time that I left CBC, the jobs had come to me in that sense. The first decision to run for Parliament, but then prime ministers offer you the cabinet jobs. Prime Minister Kavis, a political opponent, asked me to become president of the CBC. It wasn't something I had sought out. This was the first time in my career since I had been 21 that I had to look at what to do. And the first inclination is, the hardest thing was taking things off the table. So it was, I could become an astronaut or go back to school, do law, and become Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, or change my religion and become Pope, or a brilliant neurosurgeon, or whatever. And you need to have somebody around you to say, we think we should be narrowing your scope somewhat to what makes sense. You have to be able to have people around you who are comfortable and whom you trust to be able to say, this is the most cockamamie idea I've ever heard. You are out of your mind thinking about this. You are totally unqualified to do that. You also, in business, need to have people around you who say, I hear the idea that you're looking at, but here's why I think it's a bad idea. Or here's why I think it's a good idea. Or here's another idea. Have you considered this? So surround yourself with the best possible people, is whether in business or in public life. Integrity. People who are dishonest get found out. They get found out in public life. They get found out in business as well. Operate at all times with integrity. Humility. The very best leaders that I've known over the years have had a sense of humility. They're aware of their own shortcomings, and they appreciate people who can offer something that they can't. So vision, integrity, quality of people you surround yourself with, having a plan. And then the other thing, it's not just business, Colin, but it's life. The greatest gift that we can give to a young person is to give them the gift of always wanting to learn. We tend to look at education as a canning process, that we flip the lid open in kindergarten, we pour knowledge in, and then flip it closed when you attend your last class. That doesn't work. Most of us will have many jobs over the course of our career, and the nature of our job is going to be constantly evolving. I once asked, when I was defense minister, I asked the chief of the defense staff, what do you look for in a successful military officer? Said, I look for a wide range of interests. You can teach somebody gunnery, but what you need to have is somebody coming to you with broad interests, a broad understanding, and these people make the best military officers. That was quite a lesson for me, because we tend to think of the military as being terribly disciplined. You're going to be told what to do. Your orders, far from it. Western military doctrine involves people being able to think for themselves and to assume leadership. And to do that, you have to have a breadth of vision. One of the reasons why you're seeing the failures of the Russian army today in Ukraine is that much more narrow training that they have, that you're a cog in a machine as opposed to being able to supply leadership. at the end of the day, we should be looking for everybody in our organizations to be leaders in their own way. Maybe in a more narrow, confined space, but for them to be able to lead and to aspire to lead.
You got Kavis's wheels turning. I know. As soon as you talked about it, I know where Kavis gets extended. Go ahead, Kavis. We'll let you out of the box. Go ahead. Say something.
First and foremost, Colin and I are at that age where we're counting down to, so we're counting backwards. So remember that. But no, it reminded me growing up in the States and had an infatuation with the military. Someone said to me, the reason why North American militaries are always going to have an advantage is we teach to lead, whereas other militaries teach to follow. Taking that same principle and going back to what you said previously about retention in the workforce, being able to help companies not only recruit, but retain talent. It's very hard for a lot of smaller companies to grow these days. And I may be wrong on this, but just observation, it's very hard to take a small business and grow it as fast as we were able to a few decades ago because talent's always leaving. In business, what are some of the tools that leaders can use in the attempt at retention?
Well, we mentioned empathy earlier. Particularly for young people, they want to feel that there's more than a paycheck involved here. They want to feel that my organization that I'm working for understands my needs, cares about me, is interested in my professional development as well, and that I'm part of something that is greater than simply punching a clock and getting a paycheck for it. So you create an environment where people feel privileged to be there and where they feel respected, not that they're treated as a cog in a machine. I am very fortunate at the Canadian Chamber. We've grown enormously this past year. I'm very fortunate to have a brilliant chief operating officer who's come out of the private sector, having successfully built businesses to run the Canadian Chamber. So much that she can do here that is so much better than what I can do. But one of the areas where she's very focused is on our employees and our staff. We've had to do a lot of hiring over the course of the past year. Very tough environment, particularly here in Ottawa, when you can see the Peace Tower here, and the public service is our competitor for jobs, and our members, our corporate members, can write a paycheck that's considerably higher than the one we can. So why do people want to come? Well, we hope it's because they feel a sense of mission, that they feel respected in what they're doing, that they feel that even if they don't spend their whole career with us, that the time they spent to us is value added to them. That they're able to go to somebody else with something that makes them a stronger candidate than they would have been before they came here. They want an environment where it's free of hostility or harassment, where diversity is celebrated and seen as a strength rather than a challenge. And my gosh, she and the team have just done an incredible job with all of the churn and change that we have in being able to attract just outstanding people. And for me, sitting on top of the organization, where this is the work that others have done to bring in this very strong team, I just feel very privileged every day to be able to be part of that and to participate in it. But it comes down to, I think, the very first thing we were talking about: treat others with respect and with empathy, and understand that you can make all the speeches you want, you can issue all the edicts that you want, but unless people feel invested in the mission and in their job, you won't succeed. Let me give you one other example. I realize you're asking me about the private sector. But let me give you one other public sector example from my own experience. When I became Minister of National Revenue, you won't remember because you both are much too young for this.
Yes. Thank you. Someone's finally calling me young again. That's great.
In opposition, I was when Brian Mulroney became our leader, he asked me to become the shadow minister for the Department of National Revenue. And we discovered that the Department of National Revenue had become totally dysfunctional, and that the basic taxpayer rights had been taken away from people, that the quotas had been put on tax auditors, tax collectors, that they were essentially upending taxpayers and shaking loose change out of their pockets, that the basic rights of taxpayers had been taken away. And the assumption of the government was essentially, you're a potential crook. How are we going to deal with you? As opposed to, you're a law-abiding citizen who deserves to be supported until we see any evidence to the contrary. And our goal is to support you and to serve you. We created something that I chaired called the PC Task Force in Revenue Canada, where we had professional advisors. We went across the country, and every night we were in the lead on the national news, as there was revelation after revelation as to the loss of the basic rights of our citizens. It was shocking. It was front page news every single day, and we then ultimately drew up a report for the reforms that we wanted to make in Revenue Canada. Now, you can imagine the people for whom this was the least pleasant, and that was the rank and file members of the Department of National Revenue, now CRA, because the tax man is never the most, he usually doesn't win the Rotary Good Citizens Award. He's not the most, not Mr. or Mrs. Popularity in the community. And as we were going across the country and revelations of abuses from the department were being made public, a lot of people were turning on their neighbors whom they knew who worked for the tax department, and they gave them a very hard time. And I remember the calls coming into my constituency office from people working at the local tax office in Kitchener-Waterloo. And I remember one of them saying to one of my staff, I sure hope Mr. Beatty gets to be Minister of National Revenue one day so he can see how badly we've been treated as a result of his going across the country and the revelations that there've been. So these people were put through the ringer by their next door neighbors and others. I became Minister of National Revenue and inherited a department where if you had asked the employees there, who would you least like to have as your minister? Anybody in Canada. This was the person we saw on the news every night who made our life miserable. We had committed ourselves to making sweeping reforms to the system and to changing the attitude that the department had about taxpayers. That the assumption would be that Canadians are basically honest. If you treat them with decency and respect, they'll respond in kind. Very different from Canadians are all potential crooks and they should be, we should be turning the screws. I knew that I would not be successful in implementing this if it was over the objections and the fears of people within the department. The only way we could be successful was to change the culture within the department itself and to have the active buy-in of our employees, where they felt that what we were doing was the right thing and that it was something they wanted to be part of. And so the first thing was they had a right to see me firsthand, in person, and to make a decision as to whether or not they wanted to follow me or not. So I needed to get out of that office in Ottawa and go across the country and meet with my own staff and spend time with them and answer any questions they had. We created something that we created a schedule for me to go across the country. And in the morning, I would meet with tax practitioners, maybe for breakfast, talk to them about what we were trying to do. Lunchtime, perhaps give a speech to the Chamber of Commerce about the reforms, meet with local media and so on. But we would also then, the bulk of the time we would spend at the local tax office meeting with the employees. I would start first, the day before, I would have my staff call down to the district office director and say, the minister wants to meet with a focus group of employees with no management present, no union present, where literally we will call it a lottery group, where people interested in meeting with the minister under those circumstances put their names in a hat and get drawn out. And so we can have a candid conversation. So the first thing I do in going in would be meet with the district manager, then with the management team, then with the union. Then I would meet with the so-called lottery group that we had. And in meeting with the lottery group, what I would say to them, and it was interesting, you would get two reactions from the senior managers. It was either, sure, be glad to do that. That was from the good managers who were confident. The ones who weren't confident would come up and say, look, you've got to watch out, there are ringers here from all you've got is the malcontents and troublemakers here, and so on. Then you knew you had a management problem when you heard that. When I would meet with the lottery group, I would say to them, look, I'm here because I want to hear from you about how we can do the job better and what you need to do that. And I want to hear about your experience. If you've got a grievance of some sort, I don't want to hear it. We met with the union, used those processes. Instead, I want to talk about how we're doing our job and how we could do it better. And after an hour or so, I was hearing from these people. They said, "You're sending us in to sit across from the most highly skilled tax practitioners in the country, and we lack the training. So we have to make it up as we go along." In many instances, they said, "We don't even have professional business cards. We have to type our name in on the business card." As a result of this, you saw that people felt that they weren't treated with respect by their own employer, let alone by everybody else. Starting point had to be to say to these folks, you are professionals. You're going to be treated as professionals. We doubled the training budget. And we looked at ways of sending the message that you're not going to be the most popular citizen in the town, but you're going to be treated with respect and as a professional. I then went out and either we had a coffee party if it was small enough. If it was small enough, we would go out and I would go from desk to desk to meet each of the employees, let them size me up and get a sense of who I am. And I knew that they would be talking to the people in the lottery group. They'd say, who is this guy? What's he like? Is he as weird as we thought he was? And some sort of a kook. Let them make their own judgment, but meet with people directly. And in so many instances, and if it was a larger office, then we'd have a coffee party, have everybody there in one place. And I would just have a chance to speak to people, answer their questions, ask them about their kids or about what their career aspirations were and so on. Treat them with respect. 9 months later, when I left the department, we had implemented most of the recommendations that we made. And the switchboard was swamped with calls from people saying, we just want Mr. Beatty to know that we're going to miss him. That was pretty rewarding to know that, because it gave me confidence that we had made the change that we needed to make, which was cultural. It wasn't issuing instructions from a closed office. It was inspiring people to want to serve the public, and that was absolutely key in my view.
I am learning. So I told you, Kavis, we learned a lot. This is wonderful. We have a question we always ask every guest, but before we get to that, I'll let Kavis ask it this time, but before we get it, if I can make a couple of comments and Kavis, the circumstance that Perrin and I had an opportunity to meet, I'm certainly grateful for, but it wasn't over the most wonderful of circumstances. And a few years ago, I had the opportunity to be on the Regina Chamber of Commerce board and elected chair. And it was at the time that our CEO, who was very much a friend, very passionate person in our community, was gravely ill. And it was a very challenging period because he loved his role, community loved him, but it was at a point in his illness that he really could not go further. And on top of that, we were in the midst of the COVID pandemic, and so our connections to one another were really restricted. And so one of the people that I reached out to was Perrin, and didn't know him, but I found his phone number. I don't remember how I found it, but I got it somehow. Yeah, and I think I made a couple calls, and then there were a number of people that eventually got to Perrin because I knew Perrin was quite close to a mutual friend, and not only did Perrin engage in that, but for several weeks and months we've held conversations with me and had the opportunity to essentially be coached for on a couple of things, and so I'm really, really grateful for that, and then to be invited back at the beginning of the annual general meeting for the chamber. There is a collection of chamber executives, and they have a conference just preceding the AGM, and invited to come and just say a few words on behalf of our friend that we did lose earlier the year. Just an acknowledgement that his peers had, and that was a really emotional evening, Perrin. It was very emotional, and after just saying a few words, just to honoring our friend, and I had no business being there. I thought I'll just walk up back to my hotel room and wait for the rest of the session. And I was stopped by so many people who wanted to cry and hug and speak. And I never thought it was just unexpected for me to see so many people who, often in very, very powerful roles in their communities, just break down and cry. And just stand there and just hug each other in the hallway, and just while they just shared. And so I just saw this real human side of leaders who, in their own time were struggling as well, but had lost a dear friend. So, Perrin, thank you for that opportunity and to connect that way.
Collin, thank you for reaching out to me at that time. Even at the darkest times, there's something often that's good that can come out of it. In this instance, it was both the opportunity to meet you and get to know you, and to see talk about empathy. You were his boss, and you treated him with such incredible empathy and support throughout all of this. It was remarkable, and it was inspirational to me. It was also inspirational to me to see this was a very public case of cancer that he had that people were well aware of. The courage that he showed throughout all of this, and the continued dedication he had to the community and to putting back in through all of this. The tears and hugging that you're talking about that night wouldn't have taken place except for the fact that we were dealing with a very extraordinary human being who exemplified some of the best qualities of leadership. His chamber is not the largest organization in Canada, but it's an example that every size organization, every sector that we're in, leadership is absolutely critical. And this was somebody who had really provided that throughout the course of his career and had built so many friendships and relationships as a result.
Kavis, I'm going to kick it back to you. I don't want to start crying.
Out of tragedies do come some triumphs. So this is one of the triumphs.
Yeah.
We are trying to see through the course of this process of chatting with tremendous leaders like yourself is if we were to build the prototypical leader, and I think I have a couple of clues of where you're going to go with your word, what characteristic or quality would that leader have?
I think you mentioned with empathy. It's an understanding that one of the things, Kavis, that was fascinating for me is I learned that it's not the physical surroundings of the facilities that you have. It is the quality of leadership and how the team performs that makes the difference. Let me give you an example of that. Again, from my public career, I was Solicitor General of Canada, first Solicitor General not to be a lawyer. And so it was with great apprehension that I took that on. And one of the things, so you had the responsibility as Solicitor General for the RCMP, for CSIS, the security agency, for the parole board, for Secretariat, and for the prison system, the federal prison system. And it was fascinating for me because it was an area that I had never had any experience with. And I did not want the job. I was declined the job by the Prime Minister. There had been a succession of, I remember going to the office the first day and all of the former ministers were hung in effigy outside the pictures were outside the office. It was the first office I'd gone into where there was security, where you had to go through a secure door to go in, and where a number of former ministers had their careers implode on them. And I was the first one not to be a lawyer, not to have had any experience with the system. So I was extremely apprehensive about that. And the first thing I knew I had to do was to get out and learn and see things for myself. The prison system was one example. I'd always had the attitude, well, you have prisons so that I don't have to think about these things. If somebody breaks the law, send them away somewhere, and I, as a citizen, can go on with my life. I didn't have that luxury anymore. The people we were housing were going to get out sooner or later, and they were either going to reoffend, somebody might be killed or injured or have their life savings stolen, or possibly we would be able to turn somebody around and they could become productive citizens. I discovered in going around and visiting these institutions that we don't have the luxury of looking away. We have to be engaged with these toughest problems that we have. And the prison system, you would take somebody who was probably a square peg in a round hole to begin with, may have family breakdown, hadn't had an education, was living in poverty, was having difficulty holding a job, may have been had a substance abuse problem or alcohol problem, what have you, and had been sent to a federal prison for extended period, was suddenly thrown into a school for crime and forced into enforced idleness during that time. You then are let out, say, 6 years later, with no skills, with all of the problems you had when you came in, and with a criminal record, and a few dollars in your pocket, and told, go forth and sin no more. These are institutions, this is a formula for having somebody reoffend. And so the system, we do a great job of punishing. We do a good job of incarcerating and holding people out of society. We do a terrible job in terms of rehabilitating people. But going through the prison system was fascinating for me. We have very modern facilities, different levels of security, and Gothic facilities. And some of the worst riots that we had were in the most modern facilities. You go, why would it be there? And then some of the facility that astonished me was when I visited Saskatchewan, a maximum security prison, one that had a supermax inside it. So literally, I watched trucks coming in to go to the kitchen. They were searched before they came onto the grounds, then searched between the initial contact in the grounds and the time that they went into the supermax again. Among the people that we had there was the person who had killed the warden at Laval, I believe. So these were dangerous people we were dealing with there. I had been to some of the most modern prisons where you walked around, you could cut the tension like an ice, like butter. The whole atmosphere was icy, and it could have exploded at any time. You had that sense. Notwithstanding the modernness of the facility, I walked around Saskatchewan with the warden. His name was Jimmy Sullivan. And he had been there of long standing. I'd never known anybody else who wanted to be warden of a prison for his explanation to me, I don't know whether it was apocryphal or not, but he had been a labor leader, he said, in Regina, and had led a general strike, and be so flee to Prince Albert and take over the prison. It was astonishing when we walked around that facility. There was no tension, none. I felt extremely comfortable there. And when he came through, he would say good morning to the inmates, and they would say good morning, warden, and step aside as he came through. And it was an incredible education for me that it's not the physical surroundings, it's the quality of leadership that you have that determines whether an institution succeeds or fails. I saw the same thing when I was defense minister, and I saw it was the quality of leadership we had in the armed forces that was so extraordinary, and how they treated people, how they were visionary, how they were empathetic. That to me is the lesson from all of this. The single best manager of people whom I've ever met in my life was Brian Mulroney. But I was privileged I hadn't supported him for the leadership. I had supported Joe Clark.
Does he know this now? Because
I had fully expected I would be somewhere else behind the curtain, that my career was effectively over. Instead, what he did after the leadership, he said a page has been turned, and he brought all of us who'd supported Joe in to be at the center of his cabinet, and he treated us with generosity. You can imagine the loyalty that inspired in those of us who had been opponents. And then I would be home on Saturday night. My wife and I would be watching Saturday night at the movies, and the phone would ring, and it was the Prime Minister of Canada on the end of the phone, and he would say, "Perrin, it's Brian calling. Mila was telling me that she was watching TV in the house, and you gave a great speech this week." And well, gosh, thanks, Prime Minister. That's really great that you do that. But you realize it's Saturday night. There's something else that you could be doing rather than calling me to spend your time with me. There he was on a Saturday night, calling me just to be supportive and constructive. You talk to any member of that caucus, and they would tell you that they would have crawled over broken glass for him, because they felt that he had that empathy, and he was always looking for how do we treat our caucus well? How do we treat them with respect? I knew that the Prime Minister was going to be in caucus every Wednesday as a cabinet minister, and I knew that I'd better have a pretty good explanation for why I wasn't there if the Prime Minister of Canada wasn't too busy to be there with my colleagues. And I knew that if any of my colleagues was saying to the Prime Minister, the minister couldn't be bothered listening to me, or didn't take my concerns seriously, that I would be hearing about this directly from the Prime Minister as well. This was a person who recognized that all of our success was going to come from how the team functioned. Then finally, just one last comment, bringing it back, Kavis, to business again. I remember being at a lunch one day. I was sitting beside Steve Ballmer from Microsoft, the CEO of Microsoft. And I said to him, how do you spend your time as CEO of Microsoft? He said, I spend about 60% of it on HR. 60%. Not I've out trying to flog the product or to lobby Congress or to invent something new. It was, how do I build the team? And that to me was a pretty interesting lesson about leadership. Focus on people. It's about people. It's about people.
I think this is going to be a request for a repeat, or
yeah. I might as well corner you now, Perrin, because this will be an amazing podcast, and you're absolutely awesome.
Ticked me dry.
Now that we made you sweat for the last hour and some, hey, Perrin, would you ever come back and do this again with us sometime?
I'd be glad to, but it'll have to be a much shorter. Fresh ideas. The only other thing I would say, Colin, and concluding, is that I've been fortunate. I'm the luckiest person I know. And, I may not, I've said to people, I won't die rich in money, but I'll die rich in experience. And I've been so incredibly fortunate to be able to be engaged in jobs where I felt I was getting as much from the job and learning as much and having a chance to make a difference and having such incredible experiences over the course of this time working with people in Canada and internationally who are just at the very top of their field. And what an incredible privilege this has been.
Well, you've been a wonderful encourager. I've learned just so much over these last few minutes here. It's blown by. And I think our Canadian society has been blessed because of your approach to leadership and just the way that you just did it. your approach to listening and making that extra effort is something that's very motivating to me. Hearing this again, and I got to go out and buy some more empathy. If they sell it in gallons, I'll. It's.
You have a supply already.
I just there's so much more to learn. So one of the key reasons why we started this cast is we had an opportunity to learn from people like yourselves, but also be able to share it with others who want to learn and enjoy this regardless of where they're at in their career or their life. So I really appreciate it. I thank you.
And thank you very much for the service to the country, which includes all of us. And I think much like we should always salute our soldiers, present and past, that have protected and defended our right to our freedoms, we have to also serve the same honor to you who are in public service and provide and defend the democracy that we live under. So thank you very much for that.
Kavis and Collin, thank you. It's been a pleasure for me.
Wonderful.
And stay
bald. Only say stay bald. Thank you for listening to this episode of Bald Leadership. If you enjoyed the show, please follow, like, and share. See you next time.